For example, like I was actually hired to make the HTML work. He's like, well, the Perl's broken, go fix the Perl. I'm like, okay, I'll fix it. And then he's like, do you know SQL? I'm like, nope, no idea. Okay. He's like, that's fine, go write some C. That's like a good summary of my entire career. It's just like the .com bubble burst. Yeah. And laid low for a bit, went to university. I started New Villa, which was a freelance programming, web consulting, mobile consulting bit. Turned out we ended up partnering with the client, and we ended up being their technical co-founders with them. Make of that what you will. So it didn't pan out, but it was really awesome to be another technical co-founder. And I think the overall theme of my co-founding life has been, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And so I came to this point of like, I was going to university and I was one of the co-founding partners of New Villa, which was this freelance web thing, and we were doing other side projects. And then I was, at the same time, a technical co-founder of Landbroker. And that was really awesome, because it got me all this experience, it got me all, like... and so, like, that's us. We build a bunch of open source. Here, I and my coworkers help run the Stockholm Ruby meetup, the Stockholm Startup Innovators meetup, and then we've like sponsored and helped organized with Coca Heads, which is iOS, and Dribble, which is design. Right, and so all of that stuff is like, if no one else is doing it here, I'm gonna do it and make sure it happens, and try to delegate that up. So it's a lot of answering email, it's a lot of organizing meetups, and then I'm scheduling 1 day a week for programming at work. And the goal is to get it back to as much as possible. So that's what I'm currently working on. My team is some of the most brilliant people I could find in the whole world, and I moved them here to work with me. And so as much as I can, I delegate stuff off to them. Yeah, right, yeah. So I will directly answer how we advertise. So we advertise in a whole bunch of ways. So we got Twitter, we got like the new media, right? So Twitter and Facebook, and blog. So the blog is old media, but it's still newish. And so the blog is primarily technical. And so we write solutions to problems we've run into. We write things promoting open source stuff we've written to solve problems. An example of open source that we wrote a long time ago, and we still maintain, is this product called Paperclip. And if you ever need to upload files into your website, if you're using Ruby, you can use Paperclip. It's the file upload suite. And now there are now competitors to it, but when we made that, the competitors were not really there. Okay. And so that's an example of how we advertise with open source, and then we blogged about that and blogged about all the solutions there. We tweeted about new releases. Right, so there's that software portion of it, and then there's the events portion. We don't like to, we like to give talks, and we like to organize events. We find that that's the best way to advertise.
Are you focused on? So I mean, how well do you know your customers? You focus on which kind of groups?
Yeah, so our customers, they range, right? And so yes. One of our customers right now is, so he works at a larger company here in Stockholm, but he is the main contact point with them, right? And so we are building out some software for them. We're rebuilding one of their projects. This person that we're talking to, the main contact point, used to be an employee at Thoughtbot for, I think, a year, maybe 2 years. And so in terms of what do we understand about him as a customer, he is one of us. And he's as ideal of a client as we can get. That's a lot of what we're striving for, is customers like that who are developer-ish, in a startup world-ish, that kind of thing. I can say that our ideal customer is someone who has an idea, has some corporate backing, and needs someone to build out the prototype, and needs someone to build out the business idea and flesh things out and build up the company. That is what we love to do. But then some other kinds of client work we take on is if they've written a bunch of code to get to a prototype, but it's not good enough to run in production. or they're now facing scaling issues or uptime issues. We love taking on those projects. And so in that case, the target audience there is the software developer, people who are using our open source and people who have heard of us. And then they go up to the CTO, and the CTO goes up to the CEO, and they talk about things. That's how we get hired there. In a large sense, they are also one of us, right? They are software developers. The thing we provide is discipline and process. That's really the thing we've been refining for the past 10 years. And so we do often get called in for teams that are like very smart people, don't have discipline. We'll just sit with them and work that out.
And you are a managing director, so is it difficult to manage your team or project?
Yeah, so it's like herding cats. But there's a book about where he says, don't call it herding cats. Refer to it as herding lions. We're herding tigers. And he has a tiger team. Because cats are more passive, they kind of just sit around off and experiment. So they built Ruby Motion, which was a whole programming language they built so that you could write a different syntax than Objective-C. You can just use them. It's needed if you want to get like the creativity out, if you want to quickly get things down, if you want to see how other people are doing things, and you want to learn more.
Like, what's your recipe in your business model, or you just follow your hunch?
I run a branch of a 10-year-old company, and so the business model is very clear there. We are a consultancy. But that said, the business model is not very clear there. So every Friday is our investment day, when we get to work on stuff to contribute back to the company. So we work on a lot of products, and some of those internal tools get released to the public. So that's where a lot of our online courses come from. That's where a lot of... And to say we do that on a whim would be incorrect and selling us short. But to say that we've written up a full business plan for the tool and how it's going to make money, that's also incorrect. It's something in between. In that regard, it works a little like how GitHub works too. And we do a vaguely similar thing where we propose ideas, and if people jump on board, then we start working on it. And so people will come and say like, okay, well, how are we going to make money? What features do we need to get there? Some of the user experience people will come on and say like, okay, well, here's the end user's goals. We'll discuss usability testing, we'll discuss the design, and all that kind of stuff. A similar thing I did with my friends a couple of years back was we did a pitch day to each other, where we got together and we wrote ideas on the whiteboard, and we pitched it to each other to try to convince. We tried to get at least 3 people on board with each idea. Kind of the business plan aspect. There's also a lot of intuition and hunch and just driving forward and trying. You do have funding available for you, and you do have investors in that space, but they're not as hyped and they're not as easy to discover. But then if you go out into like health and you're doing anything in the health area, that group of investors is larger than say the robotics ones, and they're also more prominent and more well known. And this is true in both the US and in Europe. The investments are much lower here than in, say, San Francisco. And this is like a supply and demand thing. There's just not enough investors to drive the amount that they're funding up. We have London, we have Berlin, more Munich, and then we have Stockholm. And Stockholm is possibly the most quickly growing of the cities in Europe.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
Some other.
Another question is like, why do you choose this Android-based software system instead of something like iOS, or choose like Windows Phone, Windows platform? So what's your specific aiming at this specific area instead of other targeting places?
Right. And so some background on this. So I used to run the Boston Android meetup.
Yeah.
And we would like get together and write code, and the Android team at Google was very interested in that after I talked about it. The reason I went with Android is this is going to go super technical. So, number one reason, I have an Android phone.
Yeah, okay.
Right, so
That's the main reason.
Yeah, exactly. And how did I get there? Right, and so I'm a software developer. And even though I got my start co-founding a company, and I've always worked at companies, with the exception of some work I did, and just like there's like a lot of open source in my life. As a software developer, so like there's the paranoid in me who's like, the actual reality is, if I'm ever curious, the programmer in me can just dive down to the source code. And the amount of source diving I do is absurd. Sometimes I jump into the kernel source code, because why not? The answer to why Android is also very related to what I call the nerdiest meetup I run, which is the classical code reading group of Stockholm, where we read the classics And by that I mean echo.c and pwd.c and true.c. We read them. And since they're 40 years old, people have re-implemented them many times. So at the next meetup at the end of November, we're going to read pwd.c across 7 different implementations across 40 years and do a compare and contrast. But there's more to it than just the technicality of like. And so we did hire someone, this fantastic woman who works at Hyper Island now doing that, named Martina Elm. She's great. And so we have a large teaching component to Thoughtbot where we make online videos and make podcasts and stuff. And so we do have business and sales level. We really like to keep it programmer/designer oriented. Like we don't want to send a salesperson into a meeting to represent us without them having a ton of programming experience.
Yeah.
A large part of how our sales meetings go is we will actually discuss problems and solutions with you there in the sales meeting. And you'll say like, we need this kind of startup idea, and we'll say like, okay, we've seen that a lot. Here's what we have from our experience. Here's are the business problems you'll run into, but also here are the technical problems you'll run into. And we like to think that because we do it that way, we can provide a benefit. So we can provide an immediate demonstration of our skills. We don't want to stand up and say we are great. We instead just want to be great. And we think that by sending our team in to do the sales, then we can demonstrate value. And if we can't demonstrate value, then maybe it's not meant to be.
In future, if I will go for my company, because for the startup I can't hire lots of people. My friends or somebody who can help for my venture. So how I will select my team?
Yeah, if someone is willing to help, definitely make use of them. If someone is willing to help for free, no questions asked, just take that. The trickier bit comes when like you have to negotiate for shares in the company. You don't want to start with a 20-person startup, right? That's not a startup anymore. And that's going to reduce your shares, and it's going to make it harder for you to get investment, and it's going to be like really complicated. And so you want to start lean, you want to start with as few people as possible. And you don't need to start with marketing. Probably start with the product and the idea and fleshing that out. And if you can find someone who is willing to spend all day in business meetings talking with investors, then that person is awesome. You want that person. And if you can find someone who's willing to spend all day working on the tech, then that person is great. Everything else can be postponed.
Okay.
But like in our field, like we know Twitter, we know Pinterest, like the online social audience is built in, and we know that. There are great companies out there who will help with that, and they are more useful for an older generation than for us.
Actually, I want to ask that, is it easy for technology-based entrepreneurship to get VC in USA or in Sweden?
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely, and absolutely not. And then also a lot of it is giving direction, giving advice, and encouraging them to come to me for advice on how to interact with the company and team.
Very advices to those who want to start their own business.
Yeah. So I would say advice number 1, if you want to start your own business, is go do it. Go make a mistake. Do it as quickly as possible, as soon as possible. And you want to fail fast and learn from that, and then move on and try again. If you're not in a position where you can take risks, then there are workarounds. You can go to work your normal job, writing Java, whatever a normal job is, and then after that you go work on your startup. You come home and you hack all night. That's a little less risky, right? You get to keep your current job and keep money coming in and stuff. If you want to get funding, you should either move to a city where there are a bunch of investors, or make the city you're in become a startup city so that you can start a startup there. And I guess like recognize, not necessarily failure per se, but you have to recognize the problems and know when to pivot off of them, and know when to just fix the problem, and know when to give up. Like if the startup has failed, just give up already and start another. I mean, when I was young and foolish, I didn't know what kind of, like I was bad at negotiating. Right. Those are mistakes that cost me some money. I can't really think of anything that I would present at like a failure conference. We have these. I think there was just one at Hyper Island, I guess a few months back now. Well, and they all gave the same story of like, here's my failure, and it just came off as like, here's this problem I ran into and how I solved it. But every day, all day is just problem solving. So that's how it is.
What do you learn from those mistakes?
Yeah. And from all of those, I just learned like a little bit of humbleness and a little bit of perspective, and it turns out to be fine. And so there's that perspective that comes with it. I think once you fail a few times in some regard, then you end up kind of not caring about failure, so, which I enjoy, but it might also be like a very negative, cynical way to look at it too.
In a company, developers should do the development job, and the business people are there who is handling the sales and the marketing thing. So anything you find, like if you go for only business people, then it will be more beneficial for the third part. Like,
so we have two Indians, and he's coming from like a McKinsey background and like was like a programmer, and it took him a few months to adjust. And now he's totally into it, and he like goes to the events and talks with people and pitches. Right, it's just like it's like a part of his job. And there is the idea that if we were to get pure business people, then we could do better. And so we do have some people we interact with, especially on a contracting basis, for help with things.